painters and poetry to the world. This art-form debate spawned the arrival of theatre and eventually the wonder of movies and television, providing an invaluable escape from the tragic comedy that's known as life. The epic works attributed to the Greek poet Homer are usually considered the first extant works of Western literature and date back to the mid-8th century BCE. In the Iliad, which recounts key events of the Trojan War, Homer explores various themes such as love, loyalty, perseverance, and revenge. While the names of philosophers Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle would leave behind a more enduring footprint, humankind is equally indebted to the trailblazing Greek playwrights Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. The legendary dramatists invented the use of dialogue, developed irony as a literary technique, and challenged social norms in their plays. Many of these plays are actually still performed today. Number 4. Towering over the west bank of the Nile for some 4,500 years, the massive pyramid of Giza is the only remaining structure of the 7 wonders of the world. The astounding engineering feat is just one of many Egyptian legacies, which also includes empowering more women than any other culture in the ancient world. Furthermore, the pantheon boasts hundreds of female deities, including Bastet, the highly revered feline goddess, and irrefutable facts that your house cat is never forgotten. In terms of gender equality, Egyptian women were highly respected and enjoyed many legal rights not typical of the era. Cleopatra's extraordinary life easily ranks as the best-known character in Egyptian history, but the reign of a female pharaoh 14 centuries earlier stands as one of the most successful. Hatshepsut, meaning foremost of noble women, authorized several ambitious building projects during her 22-year rule that included the great temple of Dea el-Mahari of Luxor. She added significantly to the state coffers by overseeing a significant expansion in trade, establishing lucrative routes to the Horn of Africa that yielded valuable exotic goods such as gold, ivory, and spices. The shrewd leader also relied on her charisma, uniqueness, and urban talent to carefully mold an image of a traditional masculine pharaoh, replete with royal regalia that included a fake beard held in place by a ribbon tied over the head and attached to a gold chin strap. The unisex application of black eyeliner completed the polished appearance and look adopted by rock stars and goths, and apparently still going strong today. Number 3. Roman Empire. All roads lead to Rome is a familiar metaphor, meaning all actions eventually lead to the same place. But at the peak of the Roman Empire, the mightiest power ever seen, the phrase took on a literal connotation. Rome would become the most important city in the known world, from its modest origins on the banks of the Tiber River. A vast network of marked roads and bridges made travel possible for military troops, captured slaves, and plundered goods across a dominion that covered most of continental Europe, Britannia, Northern Africa, and Western Asia. The ability to connect East and West cultures also resulted in an invaluable wealth of knowledge. This know-how, combined with extensive manpower and resources, allowed the Romans to improve and expand on a much larger scale, building nucleus cities that featured sophisticated architecture, sewage systems, and aqueducts. Another prime example of Roman heft, the iconic Colosseum of Rome served as the largest amphitheatre ever built. It held more than 50,000 spectators. Inaugurated in 60 CE, the area hosted gladiatorial combat, prisoner executions, and mock sea battles. Number 2. Chinese. The universally acknowledged 4 great inventions of ancient China refers to paper, gunpowder, printing, and compass. As a result, the development of these technologies forever revolutionized world civilization by allowing humankind to explore new lands, their people, and atrocities and posterity. Presumably, most cultures will be content with such an impressive legacy and rest on their laurels, but not the Chinese. They've also been credited with innumerable other inventions, ranging from the cosmic toilet paper and were the first to record observations of solar eclipses and comets. However, with regards to sheer size and blatant display of just plain showing off, the Great Wall of China remains a jaw-dropping architectural triumph. Contrary to popular belief, China's most popular tourist attraction consists of many different wallwork, and not one long continuous wall. Construction began in the 2nd century BCE and would take over 2 millennia to finally complete. Various Chinese dynasties developed border fortifications as a means of protection from not-so-friendly neighbors as well as barbarian invasions. Results were mixed. In the end, the meandering barricades' total distance stretches to 22,000 kilometers, 13,670 miles, making it the longest structure ever built. Number 1. Mesopotamia. The word Mesopotamia means the land between rivers, referring to an area near the Tigris and Euphrates rivers down the Mesopotamian. Here people first gathered in mass forms in large cities while learning how to write, cultivate crops, and create governments, thus earning the title the cradle of civilization. Mesopotamia is also known as the Fertile Crescent, the boomerang-shaped region of the Middle East where agriculture and the domestication of animals was achieved in around 10,000 BCE. Several mighty civilizations would rise and fall, starting with the Sumerians. Over time, the long cast of characters featured the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Persians. While the Sumerians are typically credited with inventing a wheel and scripting the oldest surviving beer recipe, by the way, an obscure semi-nomadic group of hunters and gatherers called the Natufians can now claim the honor of being the first to brew the world's favorite alcoholic beverage. In 2018, research led by Professor Lewis discovered traces of an extensive 13,000-year-old population. The archaeologists went around the was found to wrap up a cave site suggests that Natufians brewed beer for ritual feasts to celebrate the dead. This accounts for the oldest record of man-made alcohol in the world, he said. So the next time you have a thirst-quenching lager or a super hobby IPA, be sure to pay tribute to those responsible for the festival. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. Brand new videos just like this every day of the week. And as always, thank you for watching. Just before we get started today, my apologies for the pronunciation. Sometimes I'm looking them up when I can. I got my pronunciation dictionary ready, but they're not always there. It is what it is. It's Siberia, Russia, the 30th of June, 1908. We're in a woodland area surrounding the Tunguska River, not far from modern-day Krasnoyarsk. This area is just known as Tunguska, and it's one of the most desolate areas of the most desolate regions of the Russian Empire. It's a crisp, cloudless morning, all is quiet, but the event is about to happen. In a few minutes, the sky will open into torn asunder by fire and the sound of thunder. A storm of time and space is going to descend from the sky and strike at the earth. Welcome to today's Geographic. Today we're going to explore Tunguska, an area whose name would be confined to the Atlases if it wasn't for the mysterious event that lit the skies and shook the earth for a radius of 1,000 kilometers. It's an event and it's a mystery that would take 105 years of research before we could finally write the words. The end.
Never recognize the house.
Yeah, I just seen that.
7:17 a.m.
I'm not sure what that means.
And a mysterious explosion occurs in the skies above the Tunguska River. 1,000 kilometers, that's 600 miles away from ground zero, seismic vibrations were recorded as intense as the 5th marking on the Richter scale. At 500 kilometers, 100 miles, witnesses reported deafening bangs and a fiery cloud rising above the horizon. At about 170 kilometers, that's 110 miles from the impact, just before the explosion.
Free company standing. Reddit, you're such a piece of shit website. I fucking hate you. Alright, so, other bullshit talk. Free company standing. Well, I don't know. I have no fucking clue, to be honest.
Can you remove things from your hotbar?
Hold your hotbar, press the middle pad to edit, and then hit the button twice that you want to get rid of. Oh. Excuse me. Oh, damn. Oh shit, this cutscene's still going on? Yeah, I don't even care what it says, to be honest.
Right back over there, fuck that. Oh, let's see, you go down there. I got 3 spots I can go real quick. Here. Ooh, my food's down to 30 minutes. Under attack. Oh my god. Whatever shall I do? What the fuck is that huge thing? Ooh, a mountain grizzly. This thing is huge. Ooh, it just attacked me. Sweet. Well, he didn't last very long. There is one more clue. Where shall it be? Yeah, let me know if you need help with anything or if you need help getting something that you need. Let me know. Let me know, Joe. Yeah, that's one big thingy, whatever it was. Oh, excuse me. Oh, damn, there's a big spot there, huh? I guess I shall go see what they want. What do you want, you fucking weirdo kitty? Yeah, it sucks having to wait 75 minutes when you're hungry. To the north. Ah, look at that motherfucker. I don't really want to talk to him. Excuse me. What kind of stupid shit will I have to fight down here? Find this douchebag. I hate playing hide and go seek with these fucking dipshits.
Alright, I'm going out for a cigarette.
Yep. You have fun doing it. No, you learn them as you hit certain levels, and depending on what job you are. Isn't that encouraging?
What?
Oh,
I didn't hear you.
Oh.
Headphones in there now somehow.
It's like you learn them already depending on what jobs you are, and certain jobs just don't have them. Although there is some abilities that do give a little bit of health back. It's called being tactical with your attacks.
Yeah, I haven't figured any of my attacks that have yet.
Well, you go into your actions and traits. That is under your options, and you can see what all the ones you'll learn are. Yeah, you will see. Okay. Oh. Oh, yeah. Lotion, all right.
Let's stop and think of what I wanted. Okay, let's just get a bottle flip.
an object was spotted in the clear daytime sky as a brilliant sun-like fireball traveling at enormous speed, leaving a trail of thunderous noises. 60 kilometers, that's 40 miles from ground zero at the time of the explosion. People were thrown to the ground by the shockwaves or even knocked unconscious. Windows shattered in a hail of shards, while furniture, crockery and other objects fell to the ground. Now 30 kilometers or 20 miles from the site of the explosion, the closest inhabited area, a few moments before the blast, a group of reindeer herders are asleep in their tents. And then a sudden deflagration sends them flying through the air, knocking them unconscious. An elderly herder is sent flying for 12 meters, that's 40 feet, smashing into a tree, causing a compound fracture of his arm. He later dies from his injuries. Hundreds of the herder's reindeers are killed and trees are set ablaze and fall to the ground, their tops pointing radially away from ground zero like giant arrows. Another herder reported, the ground shook and incredibly prolonged roaring was heard. Everything round about was shrouded in smoke and fog from burning, falling trees. Eventually the noise died away and the winds dropped, but the forest went on burning. Many reindeers rushed away and were lost. So what happened? Eyewitnesses in Karensk and nearby towns share the same recollection of a fireball flashing across the sky, reading as such. A ball of fire coming down obliquely. A few minutes later we heard a separate deafening crash like peals of thunder, followed by 8 loud bangs like gunshots. A ball of fire appeared in the sky. As it approached the ground, it looked like a flattened shape. A flying star with a fiery tail. Its tail disappeared into the air. After the object crossed the sky and approached the horizon, it was consistently described as a pillar of fire. The fireball appeared 2 or 3 times larger than the sun, but not as bright. The trail was like a fiery white stripe, its colour sometimes changing to red and bluish-white. Some minutes after the explosion, distant observers reported a vertical column of smoke on the horizon. One observer said, where the body disappeared behind the horizon, a pillar of dark smoke rose up. It was unclear from reports whether the pillar was a mushroom-like cloud generated directly from the explosion or smoke from the forest fires. Days later, strange phenomena were observed in the sky of Russia and Europe, like glowing clouds, colourful sunsets, and a weak luminescence in the night. Unfortunately, the inaccessibility of the region and Russia's unstable political situation at the time prevented any further scientific investigation. It would take 19 years before mineralogist Leonard Kulik organised an expedition to investigate what may have happened.
No,
In 1921,
the level is shallow.
What do you mean?
Well, when it says I have level 12, all classes level 12 is yellow. It's not green or red.
It's not in red, so you should be able to use it. Might not be the greatest piece of equipment for you, but...
Well, considering I'm only a level 10 right now, I can use higher level stuff.
You can't put anything on that's above your level.
Oh, okay, then I'm pointless to have it then.
Well, you might be there before long, though.
Well, it's just I'm trying to increase what I have right now.
Understandable.
Leonard Kulik, former soldier, revolutionary, and now professor of mineralogy, was charged with locating and examining meteorites that had fallen within the Soviet Union. While prepping for this expedition, he came across an account of an explosion in Tunguska, reprinted from an old newspaper. During his first expedition, Kulik only managed to figure out the general location of the blast area, but not actually visit it. He continued to collect stories about the events, and one in particular tickled his curiosity, from ethnographer I.M. Suslov. He had collected the story of a family living 25 miles from the blast. The entire group was thrown down by the force of the blast, and several were knocked unconscious. The wife reported that when they awoke, they found the forest blazing around them with many fallen trees. Some of the children described it as such, a terrible storm so great it was difficult to stand. The trip was not an easy one. The maps were inaccurate, the compasses seemed to be confused, and the terrain was inhospitable. By the end of March, Kulik reached the town of Vanavara, located on the Tunguska River, the last outpost of civilization, before the expedition had to traverse the swampy forest where Kulik was sure to locate the site of the event. Kulik tried to interview the locals, but found that many of them did not like to discuss the event. The ethnic minority of the Tungus still had shamanic beliefs and were convinced that the event was a visitation of Ogdi, the local god of thunder. Ogdi had cursed the area by smashing trees and killing animals. No man now approached the site for fear of being cursed by this god. Kulik had to wait for the snow to melt in April, and then he continued on horseback, his party suffering from infections and malnutrition. After swapping horses for reindeer, they reached the Nakirta River and saw the first evidence of the Tunguska blast, a fallen charred trees. Kulik noticed that the trees had been burned from above. He was sure it was the work of a sudden flash of intense heat and not a forest fire. As they approached the epicenter, the local guides grew wary of Ogdi's wrath, and they refused to continue. Kulik had to return to Vanavara to hire some new scouts. Kulik's expedition returned to the dead forest on the 20th of May. The direction of the fallen trees pointed towards ground zero of the blast, which Kulik finally located. It was an area known as the Southern Swamp. With the mind of a mineralogist, Kulik had formulated a simple hypothesis. The blast had been caused by a meteorite. When he reached ground zero, what he found was not what he expected. First of all, there wasn't a crater, which made him ask the big question, well, how does that work? Moreover, at the epicenter of the blast, Kulik saw a standing forest of trunks, straight and tall, but charred and stripped of branches like telephone poles. The mystery is deepened by an eerie landscape. Kulik wrote, "The solid ground leaped outward from the spot in giant waves, like waves in water." Realizing that nothing more could be done on this trip, with only 3 or 4 days of food left, Kulik decided to leave. He returned for 2 more expeditions in 1929 and 1938, but both proved inconclusive. Everyone was wondering how there could be no crater. Another scientist, Krenov, returned in 1940. His theory was that the meteorite had exploded mid-air, hence the absence of a crater. What people were really wondering was whether this was possible, and more importantly, why couldn't anybody find any specimen of the meteoric rock? Unfortunately, though, the war put an end to his research, and Tunguska remained a mystery for many decades. The fact that the event was investigated so late, the scarcity of information outside of scientific circles, the secretive nature of Soviet regimes, all of these factors contributed to the proliferation of theories as to the exact nature of what really happened in Tunguska. Some theories are fascinatingly outlandish, others less so, but they are probably right. So let's start with theory number 1. Engineer and sci-fi writer Alexander Katsentzis and Soviet scientist Alexei Zolotov argued that a nuclear explosion of possible extraterrestrial origin caused the Tunguska blast. Either a UFO crashed in Siberia due to a malfunction, or an interplanetary weapon was detonated there for unknown reason. Katsentzis also claims that geomagnetic anomalies that were recorded were similar to those of a nuclear blast. T.R. Lemaire, a science writer, continues this thought, but suggests that the blast's timing seems too fortuitous to be an accident. Calculating the rotation of the Earth, he claims that a 5-hour delay would make the target of destruction a St. Petersburg, or a small change of trajectory would have devastated populated areas of China or India. Lemaire maintains that the flaming object was being expertly navigated. He said that it was using the binder as a reference point, and that it changed direction mid-flight twice. His fascinating conclusion is that the alleged aliens may have been on a bombing mission similar to Enola Gay's. Also, the weather conditions were favourable. He believes that at the last moment they opted for an act of clemency and dropped their weapon on an uninhabited area. And now let's get into theory number 2. Another theory puts the blame on a failed experiment by Nikola Tesla. This is related to one of his projects, the Wardenclyffe Tower, which stood 60 metres or 187 feet tall and was located on Long Island in New York. The purpose of the tower was to facilitate worldwide wireless communication and to deliver electrical energy over great distances. This is something Tesla had achieved on a smaller scale with his coil. The project was scrapped when financiers backed out. However, the theory goes that around the Tunguska event, explorer Robert Peary was on an expedition to the North Pole. Tesla contacted him before the trip and asked him to report back on anything unusual he encountered. So, could Tesla have fired a blast of energy at the uninhabited North Pole and missed, perhaps hitting Tunguska instead? This theory aligns with those who claim that Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower was an operational superweapon. A death ray. Tesla claims that he did design and test a similar device later in his career, a beam projector called Teleforce. But all of this is pretty much science fiction, so let's step away from that and go to theory number 3. In 1973, a paper was published in the journal Nature suggesting that a black hole colliding into the Earth caused the explosion. The theory was put forward by the Center for Relativity Theory, University of Texas. A small black hole descended upon Tunguska, created the craterless impact, sped through the Earth, and then exited the planet in the North Atlantic. To validate the theory, all it would take is to investigate the bottom of the ocean where possible. Nobody has ever financed that expedition, and the theory is widely discredited. Along the lines of theoretical physics, another hypothesis suggests that the Tunguska event could have been the result of matter and antimatter colliding. When this happens, the particles annihilate and emit intense bursts of energy. Also, this theory has remained unproven. Following Kulik's expedition, Russian researchers were puzzled by the lack of craters and alien rock fragments at ground zero. They tried to explain this by positing that it was the icy fragments of a comet which caused the damage. The comet itself largely made up of ice, and it is possible that a large rock detached from a larger body and plunged into Earth. The ice would have evaporated violently as it entered the Earth's atmosphere, causing a blast. An opposite theory emerged in the 1960s, fire from the Earth. Verne shots, named after author Jules Verne, are speculative magma reactions that violently erupt from underground. A magnetic intrusion beneath Siberia may have formed a large body of trapped volcanic gases. The covering rocks shattered and bursts of burning methane caused a series of explosions that was described by witnesses. The geologists mapping the area found no traces of shattered rocks or gas dumps. So this leaves us with theory number 6. The obvious explanation was that a meteorite made of rocky material had exploded before hitting the Earth's surface, like Krinov had theorized. This explains the lack of a crater, but we've still got the problem of the absence of fragments. In 2013, a team led by Viktor Kvasnitsia of the National Academy of Sciences in Ukraine put a start to all the speculation. The researchers analyzed microscopic samples of rocks collected from the explosion site in 1978. The samples were found to be of meteoric origin and were recovered from a layer of peat dating back to 1908. So the fragments were there, but nobody had thought about looking for the very small ones. The fragments are traces of Lonsdaleite, a mineral known to form when a meteor crashes into Earth. Kvasnitsia stated, "We believe that nothing paranormal happened at Tunguska." Alright, but the alien bombing theory has its merits, right? We believe that nothing paranormal happened at Tunguska. Alright, but Tesla, I mean, he's got to have something to do with it, right? Alright, yes, nothing paranormal happened at Tunguska. Today, the consensus is that the Tunguska event was caused by a large meteor colliding with Earth's atmosphere. First, the cosmic body entered our atmosphere at about 15 kilometers per second. That's 9 miles per second. Our atmosphere is a great protective shield, generally successful in breaking up rocks a few kilometers above the Earth's surface, producing an occasional shower of smaller rocks that, by the time they hit the ground, are cold. These large cold fragments are the ones that normally dig up a crater, but in the case of Tunguska, the incoming meteor may have been extremely fragile, or the explosion was so intense that it obliterated all its remnants about 8 to 10 kilometers above the Earth. This process explains the event's second stage. The atmosphere vaporized the object into tiny pieces, while at the same time intense kinetic energy also transformed them into heat. The sudden release of heat accounts for all phenomena observed by eyewitnesses and scientists: the powerful blast, the extensive shockwave, the forest fires, and the absence of a crater. But just think about that. Just think about that 15 kilometers per second. That's 900 kilometers per minute, 560 miles per minute. The meteor could have flown the whole width of the US, coast to coast, in about 5 minutes. It would have taken just a few extra seconds for the meteor to hit a less desolate area. What would have happened if humanity hadn't been so lucky on that day? The explosion caused one victim, of course one too many, but it could have been a catastrophe of a much larger magnitude. The meteor was assumed to be 30 meters wide, its mass estimated to be 42 million kilograms or 93 million pounds. Based on these parameters, you can calculate the total energy released by the explosion via the formula in the caption below. And no, I'm not going to try and read that. Assuming half of the energy is dispersed to noise, attrition, and fragmentation, the explosive energy is still the equivalent of 500 kilotons of TNT, that's 16 times the explosive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Other accounts claim 185 times, but let's stick to the conservative estimate here. The projectile traveled in a southeast and northwest direction. A quick look at Google Maps will show you that the land northwest of Krasnoyarsk is still sparsely inhabited today. But if any Russian viewers would like to confirm or dispute that, please do use the comments. Depending on how the object traveled, though, you could draw a straight line from Krasnoyarsk to St. Petersburg, the then capital of the Russian Empire, which is located about 3,600 kilometers or 2,200 miles away from the site of the impact. But what if the object had traveled at a slightly different angle than the 60-degree azimuth estimated by researcher Fezenkov? This is the angle between the trajectory of the flying object and the Earth's surface at the point of impact. At a different angle, and with its speed, it would have only taken about 4 additional minutes for the object to reach St. Petersburg. This is a city which, according to a 1905 census, counted 1.6 million inhabitants. I'll leave it to your imagination what the effects of 60 Hiroshima bombs hitting an urban area with such population would do. The blow on the Russian Empire, though, it would be devastating. The enormous death toll would leave an enduring scar on the country, victim to the largest loss of life in one single event in the history of humanity. And what about the effects on the history of Russia? Around May and June of 1908, Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra were in the Baltics, hosting a visit from the British King, Edward VII. We don't know their location, but on the 30th of June, let's assume they were at sea and they survived. The rest of the political leadership might not have had the same luck. The destruction of St. Petersburg would obliterate the Fourth Duma. This was the parliament instituted after the 1905 revolution, and its fourth term was a conservative assembly with little representation of opposition and minority groups. The St. Petersburg events would radically modify the makeup of Russian society. Nicholas's leadership was already on shaky ground after 1905, and the tragedy of June 1908 would decapitate the political class that was supportive of his rule. This may result in a quicker version of the 1917 revolution. Veterans from the 1905 uprising may take the opportunity to establish separate governments and assembly in Moscow, ousting the Tsar. A Russian civil war may ensue, like in our timeline, but maybe without any foreign intervention. France and the UK were tied to the Russian government, but these were defensive alliances against Germany, so maybe they would not intervene to support the Tsar. Plus, unlike our timeline, the French and British armies were not fully mobilized in 1908. Could this have resulted in a consolidated Soviet Union several years ahead of schedule? Alternatively, what if the St. Petersburg event spurred a unitarian movement in Russia instead? What if the other European countries rallied together to provide humanitarian aid to the stricken empire? What if the British and Germans set aside their naval rivalry pre-World War I to better assist Russia? So I realise we went from science fiction to science and then back to science fiction again, so I'm just going to stop here. If we have any art historians in the audience, please write your scenarios in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And now we just have to ask, when can we expect the next Tunguska? Well, one already happens on the 15th of February 2013 when a smaller meteor burst in the atmosphere near Chelyabinsk in Russia. This event created an opportunity for researchers to apply modern computer modeling techniques to explain what happened. Based on the current knowledge of the asteroid population, an object like the Chelyabinsk meteor can impact the Earth every 10 to 100 years on average. That's quite a frequency, but the blast of this meteor was less violent than Tunguska's, resulting in an estimated 1 million broken windows and several injuries, none of which were fatal. But what about the larger rocks, like the one that hit Tunguska? By combining clues from the magnitude of that event with the most recent asteroid population estimates, NASA researchers have concluded that the average interval between such impacts is on the order of millennia rather than centuries. Still, NASA's advice is to remain aware and prepared for such a hazard. Asteroids have hit the Earth, and more asteroids will hit again. The systems NASA is developing will ensure we can better prepare for dangerous impacts. Here are some words of reassurance from Lorian Wheeler, a researcher working on NASA's asteroid threat assessment project. Because there are so few observed cases, a lot of uncertainty remains about how large asteroids break up in the atmosphere and how much damage they could cause on the ground. However, recent advancements in computational models, along with analyses of the Chelyabinsk and other meteor events, are helping to improve our understanding of these factors so that we can better evaluate potential asteroid threats in the future. Tunguska is now considered an astronomical cold case, but forensic research on the events is inspiring modern-day investigators to mitigate future threats. Thinking about a potential forthcoming impact,
Mitigate future threats.
To NASA
Really?
or the ESA or whoever will save the world. And that's to not take inspiration from Hollywood. Instead of taking some oil drilling experts and teaching them to be astronauts, isn't it easier, quicker, and cheaper to take the astronauts and teach them to drill and plant explosives instead? That's it from me today. Please do leave your comments, corrections, of course, and alternative scenarios.
How do you mitigate a fucking meteor?
I don't know. They'll figure out something.
Well, they'll say they'll figure out something until they don't figure it out, and we're fucked. Just like they said they figured out how to make New Orleans safe from the waters. Yep, sure did. Katrina
They were
proved.
safe. They were safe for years, though.
Mm-hmm. Until a problem really popped up.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I've eaten so much of this mac and cheese now, it's ridiculous.
Russia is all about dancing bears, vodka, and oligarchs. It has those things in spades, but at 6.6 million square miles with a population of 144 million, you know there has to be a few more things going on. It's a very misunderstood country with, admittedly, a lot of awful things going on, but it also has more than its fair share of the unusual as well. Here are some of the most obscure facts about Russia that few people realize. Number 10. Russia has a ton of dangerous elevators. Moscow is one of the largest cities in the world, with a population of just shy of 12 million people. To serve the elevating needs of those people, the city has about 120,000 elevators. The country as a whole has over 450,000 of them. Now, odds are you've never taken an elevator head count before to determine if that number is incredibly high or incredibly low. The answer is really, really high. That's more than double the number of elevators you'll find in New York City. So far so good, but also not really. The elevators in Russia are unreliable and old. Upwards of 200,000 people per year get stuck in elevators in Moscow because a solid 20% of them have
Don't
exceeded
use
their recommended
elevators in
lifespan.
Moscow.
In 2017, it was estimated at least
Or
27,000
Russia.
elevators were in need of repairs. This is compared to Chicago, which reports a mere 100 people per year stuck in elevators. Next time you're in Russia, well, maybe consider taking the stairs. Number 9. Russia has a record number of millionaires. We hear a lot in the media about Russian oligarchs, so much so that the word kind of loses its meaning. An oligarch is basically just a very wealthy person whose wealth has afforded them political influence. The reason that the term gets lobbed towards Russian business people so often is because Russia has an absolutely massive number of millionaires. In 2018, Russia had 189,500 millionaires, a number that rose by more than 7,000 in a single year, making it a millionaire growth record. There are also 106 billionaires in Russia, and Moscow has the third highest number of billionaires in all of the cities in the world. Number 8. Beer wasn't considered alcohol until 2011. Russians have a reputation for drinking, but it should be noted that it's also an outdated reputation. In recent years, Russian drinking has been curbed considerably, as they consume far less than they did 10 or 20 years ago on average. That said, they still enjoy their alcohol, as witnessed by what they even consider alcohol. Beer, for instance, wasn't officially alcohol in the country until a presidential decree made it so in 2011. Prior to that, they considered it a soft drink on par with Pepsi and Mr. Pibb. Public health officials helped get the change put in place after beer drinking had gotten so out of hand that people were selling it on street corners from hot dog carts, and you could see teenagers roaming around the streets and riding the bus with bottles in hand. The country was given 2 entire years to adjust to the new rules regarding where and how beer was sold. In 2013, beer was only allowed to be sold by licensed vendors and not between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. It also banned the sale at places like gas stations and kiosks. Prior to this move, Russians had been consuming upwards of 5 gallons of pure alcohol per year, and about 1 in every 5 Russian deaths was linked in some way to alcohol consumption. Number 7. Women in Russia outnumber men. There's long been a stereotype of the mail-order Russian bride, and it's not all based in perverse fantasy in this information. Fact is, there are too many women compared to men in the country by a fairly impressive margin. There are 1,159 women for every 1,000 men in Russia. The ratio is slightly higher in urban areas and slightly lower in rural areas, but across the board there are more women. In total, it works out to around 10 million more women than men in the country. For an added twist on this, there are about 20 million bachelors in Russia as well, the result of which is a fairly low overall birth rate. So why is there such a disparity between men and women? Well, in part, you can head back to our previous point, where for many years, men particularly had an unusually high mortality rate related to alcohol. That's not the only reason the Second World War destroyed the male population of Russia, and in 1950, there were less than 77 men for every 100 women. The numbers got better as the years passed, but they never really evened out. Number 6. Russia once famous for beards. It takes a certain kind of man to wear a beard, and not everyone can pull it off. Sometimes they grow in patchy, weird. Sometimes they make you look like a Sasquatch. And once upon a time in Russia, they were a financial liability. In the late 1600s, Tsar Peter the Great had a real hate of beards. The thinking here is that beards were a little backward and a little old school, and Russia was trying to modernize and be like the West. That meant an end to beards, or if you wanted to keep it, you had to pay tax on it. And if you did pay to keep your beard, you got a nifty little coin to prove that your beard was legal. It stayed in place until 1722. Number 5. Carpets are wall decorations in Russia. Have you ever watched YouTube videos from Russia, or just footage of regular people in their homes in the country, and noticed that there are a staggering number of Russians who have carpets on their walls? It's actually a fairly commonplace wall covering in many parts of the country, and there's good reason for it. As the Soviet Union really kicked into high gear and people migrated from rural areas to the cities, many buildings were erected to accommodate the new metropolitan populace. These buildings were not necessarily the highest quality, though. There were lots of cracks and drafts that ran down the walls. These would keep you cold on a harsh Moscow night. And the walls were also thin enough that if your neighbour had the TV on, well, you're listening to it as well. Carpets became multi-purpose wall decoration that looked artsy, kept you warm, and buffered against noise. Number 4. The Hermitage Museum is full of cats. Russians have an appreciation for art that is hard to wrap your head around. To understand this, look no further than the Hermitage Museum and its more than 3 million exhibits. According to those who have crunched the numbers, if you took 1 minute to appreciate each item for 8 hours a day, you could finish your museum tour in a brisk 15 years. You'll also have to walk about 6 miles through 350 exhibit rooms in 6 different buildings. There's a lot of museum here, and there are also a lot of cats. Before the museum was a museum, it was a place for the Russian Tsars. In 1745, Elizabeth of Russia ordered that cats be placed on guard duty to patrol for the night. Though the cats were killed off during the Second World War, more were brought in after, and now there are over 70 cats that call the museum home. They even have their own press secretary, the kitchen to make them meals, and a small cat hospital. Number 3. Russia is home to the world's largest and deepest lake. Russia is one waterlogged country by any estimation. Canada takes the cake for most lakes. Russia is home to the largest and deepest lake on Earth. Lake Baikal in Siberia is home to upwards of 1,800 endemic species, including a species of freshwater seal and 20% of the world's entire supply of fresh water. How much water is that? Well, 5,521 cubic miles of water, equal to all 5 North American Great Lakes combined. The maximum depth of the lake is 5,324 feet. Lake Baikal attracts a lot of tourists to the area, in part because all that water is stunningly clear. When the fresh snowmelt is filling the lake, you can see 130 feet straight down. The fact that it's also the oldest lake in the world is probably drawing some people to its shores as well. Best guess is that the lake formed somewhere between 20 and 25 million years ago. Along with the nervous seals that are endemic to the lake, the Baikal oilfish, the omelfish, and the massive Baikal sturgeon are also found in this lake. Number 2. There are wolf superpacks in Russia. The average wolf pack in most parts of the world has 6 wolves in it, like a furry little Brady Bunch kids stable. They can grow larger, of course, and some massive wolf packs have been recorded having 37 wolves, like the Druids wolf pack at Yellowstone Park. That gives you some perspective on how absolutely out of the ordinary it was when in 2011 the Russian town of Verkhoyansk had to deal with a superpack of 400 wolves. The wolves had reportedly taken down 30 horses in just 4 days. The town only has 1,300 residents and is so remote that Stalin used to send people to go there as punishment. But with 400 wolves on the loose, the government was offering cash rewards for wolf packs, and helicopter runs took place to shoot the wolves. Experts claimed that the situation seemed dubious at best, but town officials were adamant that this was a real issue. The lack of natural prey and the utter remoteness of the region could have greatly contributed to the merging of many smaller packs into one super pack. So is it possible that the number of wolves was exaggerated? Well, absolutely. But it was believable enough that the Guinness Book of World Records took note of it. Number 1. Russians divorce more than they marry. Marriage and Russia...
They divorce more than they marry?
The ratio of marriage to divorce in Russia in 2016 was 1 to 1.6. That means that for every 5 couples that get married in Russia, 8 other couples get divorced. Every second marriage in Russia ends in divorce, making them world leaders in unsuccessful second marriages. The reason for the high rate of divorce is that you can do it with almost no effect whatsoever. In Russia, laws dealing with divorce are extremely loose. For instance, for just a few $100s, you can find a lawyer on the internet who will end your marriage without your spouse even knowing it happened. You don't even need to leave the house to do it either. Consent of your spouse isn't necessary, the lawyer never needs to meet you, and you could do it on the phone while having dinner with your spouse, and you'd be single in time for dessert. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did,
wow.
Do not forget to subscribe.
That's crazy.
Brand new videos every day of the week. And if you want more from me, why not check out another...
That again, kind of is.
Fucking... How is it they have more divorces than marriages? For some reason, that just doesn't work out in my head.
It doesn't in mine either. How in the hell do you have 5 marriages and 8 divorces?
Right? Unless maybe it's a newer stat, like in the last 10 years, and there's still, and a bunch of old people are still getting divorced. I don't know.
That's possible.
Fuck if I know. I'm just baffled by it. Like, huh? 5 people get married, 8 people get divorced. Weird. What do you mean? What the fuck happened to that movie? It's a great movie. Alright, let's see. What is the next one I want to watch? The Fascinating World of Deep Mountain Lake. Sounds rather boring. That time North America tried to tear itself apart. Sure, why not?
Thanks to Brilliant for supporting this episode of SciShow. Go to brilliant.org/SciShow to check out their new course, Knowledge and Uncertainty. 1.1 billion years ago, long before the dinosaurs, there wasn't much going on in the world. Many geologists even call this the boring billion, because when it comes to the evolution of life and the conditions on our planet, not a lot happened for a billion years. Except in Laurentia, the continent that became Central North America. This time was anything but boring. The continent was busy trying and failing to rip itself in half. Like if it had succeeded, what is now Lake Superior would have been an ocean. But instead, we are left with a huge scar across the land called the Mid-Continent Rift, and a story about how Earth changes and what might have been. Looking at a map, it's not obvious that what's now North America almost split in half. Even scientists didn't realize anything was suspicious until the 1940s. Around then, geophysicists were mapping the strength of gravity across the U.S. You perceive gravity as being pretty much the same everywhere, but really, it's ever so slightly different from place to place. A lot factors into that, but one big culprit is the density of the rocks under your feet. Denser rocks have more mass, so they have a slightly stronger gravitational pull. This is not something you would ever notice, but geophysicists can measure this with an ultra-sensitive instrument called a gravimeter, and it can give them some insight into what's beneath the ground. This is actually a pretty common practice, and these maps are especially useful if you're looking for oil and gas or for minerals to mine. But when the first detailed gravity maps of the middle of the continent emerged, scientists noticed something was really off. There was this huge region of stronger gravity extending from Ontario all the way to Kansas. There were some very dense rocks down there. They called this the mid-continent gravity high, and they realized it was connected to rocks they already knew about, some dense volcanic rocks at the surface around Lake Superior. Soon, scientists figured out that these rocks actually extended underground across the U.S. In fact, with more research, they learned that the rocks went from Oklahoma up to Lake Superior, then from Lake Superior as far south as Alabama. And the rocks themselves, they were 1.1 billion year old flood basalts. Flood basalts form when a massive amount of magma comes up through the Earth's mantle and erupts, flooding the surface with lava. And eventually, that lava cools into a dark, dense rock, basalt. In this case, they estimated that nearly 2 million cubic kilometers of magma were responsible for these flood basalts, which, brings up a very good question. What happened in North America a billion years ago? Well, since the 1950s, geologists have thought this strange formation was a rift. That's a place where one of the tectonic plates making up the Earth's surface thinned and began to break into two. But that still left more questions than answers. Like, why did the rift start in the first place, and why did it stop? After all, when a rift starts, it can keep going until it forms a new ocean, and there obviously isn't one of those in the middle of the US and Canada. Also, where did all of that basalt come from? Most of the other rifts we know about aren't filled with such thick layers of volcanic rock. So why is the mid-continent rift so different? Today, this is still an active area of research, and there are many pieces of this puzzle we don't quite know yet. I mean, looking a billion years into the past is kind of a big project. But by studying other rifts around the world and the flood basalts in North America, geologists have put together a pretty good picture. To understand what happened here, you have to know a bit about what happens as continents move. When continents break up and form oceans, they tend to follow a fairly predictable pattern called the Wilson cycle. First, a rift forms and a continent is pulled apart. Hot material from the mantle rises and fills in this gap. Today, the most famous example of this is the East African rift, which will likely form the Earth's next ocean. Second, if the rift is successful, it properly becomes an ocean. So in addition to a bunch of water and fish showing up, this means a mid-ocean ridge forms. This is a line of undersea volcanoes near the center of an ocean where a new seafloor made of basalt is created. And it works a bit like a conveyor belt. Once the molten rock cools into new ocean crust at the mid-ocean ridge, it slowly moves outward to each side. This is called seafloor spreading. Third, a subduction zone forms at the edge of the ocean. This is where the oceanic plate starts slipping beneath a continent and gradually disappears into the mantle. Fourth, the continents on each side of the ocean close in, and finally the continents smash together and close the ocean entirely, often forming huge mountain ranges as they go. 1.1 billion years ago, the continents overall were at the end of this cycle and were in the process of coming together into a huge landmass called Rodinia. And in the midst of the continents smashing into one another, one called Amazonia, which is now much of what we know as Brazil, broke away from Laurentia. This breakup happened right next to the mid-continent rift, so geologists think this might be the key to understanding why Laurentia almost split in two. The current thinking is that as Amazonia broke away, it pulled and stretched Laurentia from the side. That's what's called passive rifting, and it happens when a sideways force pulls a continent apart. This thins the crust and brings up hot material from below. Rocks near the surface break, and those deeper down stretch and flow, kind of like pulling apart a candy bar. By looking at modern rifts like the one in Africa, geologists have learned that this usually doesn't happen cleanly. Instead of breaking in two, a tectonic plate will often fracture into smaller sections called microplates. And the two arms of the mid-continent rift formed the boundary of the Illinois microplate, which was directly connected to the larger breakup of Laurentia and Amazonia. But that still doesn't explain the huge amount of flood basalts. Instead, those are the remnants of an active rift. Those happen when a hot plume from the mantle rises, heats, and melts the crust above it. This causes the crust to thin and rise up, weakening it and causing it to break. And in this case, it suggests that a mantle plume was in the right place at the right time. So as the plate stretched, magma filled the cracks from below, and it continued to fill up even after the stretching stopped. That means that 1.1 billion years ago, if you were standing in the middle of what is now Minneapolis or Detroit, you would not recognize anything about it. Volcanoes extended
200
across
years
the
ago, we
continent,
won it.
erupting lavas that cooled into basalt, similar to what you see today in Hawaii or the East African Rift. And this wasn't just like a dangerous year. This went on for around 15 million years until, for some reason, it stopped. If you do a quick Google search about this, you might see the ending blamed on a collision with another landmass, one that might have collided with Laurentia and essentially pushed the continent back together. And this collision did happen. It's called the Grenville orogeny. Orogeny meaning a collision between two plates that deforms them.
Sounds like
and
a
builds
sexual
mountain
act.
ranges, and it was part of the formation of Rodinia. There's even a line of deformed rocks called the Grenville Front, which stretches through Ontario and Quebec, and even matches up with rocks in Scotland, since the Atlantic Ocean formed much later than all this. The Grenville Front actually intersects the Mid-Continent Rift in Michigan, too. But in the last 10 years, geologists have realized this old story isn't quite right. After remapping the area and realizing they misinterpreted some of the rocks, they now believe the Grenville Front likely formed after the Mid-Continent Rift stopped, and all that compression happened much later. So now a more recent hypothesis suggests that when Amazonia finally broke away and an ocean started forming between it and Laurentia, all that stress on Laurentia was relieved, and the rifting ended. We're not exactly sure why this happens, but we do know that it happens elsewhere. Like around 130 million years ago, the West Central African Rift System cut right through the continent as Africa and South America began to separate. Except once seafloor spreading began in the Atlantic, rifting in Central Africa stopped, and the continent remained intact. Still, however it happened, the story of this rift was not over yet, because even after the drama was over, the Earth kept changing, like it's still changing all the time today. After the volcanoes stopped erupting, rivers gradually eroded the rock into sedimentary layers that buried the basalts. Then, much later, the entire area was compressed and pushed upwards. Glaciers eroded the sediments off the top of the volcanic rocks and carved out what is now Lake Superior. So even though we say it failed, the Mid-Continent Rift has a lot to be proud of. It's created some amazing landscapes in the eastern U.S. and southern Ontario, and in fact, it is the deepest known rift on Earth that didn't form an ocean. In the end, it's a rare snapshot of what happens in the midst of continents trying to break apart, and what happens when they almost succeed. In geology, and really in just about everything else, there's a lot we don't know, and that's part of this whole human experience thing. But if you want to make your life feel a little more certain, you might like Brilliant's brand new Knowledge and Uncertainty course. It gives you math.
No, I want it. Bye. Well, shit, dude, I'm gonna go take a nap.
Alright.
I'm fucking tired for some reason.
Yeah, I'm getting there too.
Fucking pain just drains the shit out of you.
You can.
Oh, it has been since I fucked up my hip.
I would tell you to smoke a